My name is Marjorie Walker. I'm 58 years old, living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've spent the last 25 years of my life working as a home health nurse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, long hours, aching feet, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'm helping someone breathe easier. I've been a widow for more than a decade now. My husband, Robert, passed away suddenly from a heart attack one cold December night. I still remember the smell of the hospital room and the way the nurse squeezed my hand when they told me he was gone. After that night, the world went silent for a while. But I had two reasons to keep going. My children, Evelyn and Jackson. Evelyn is 32 now. Calm, thoughtful, always the kind of daughter who calls just to check if I've eaten. She works as a teacher and has a way of talking to people that makes even strangers feel safe. Jackson is 27, full of energy, always chasing new opportunities, sometimes failing but never giving up. He reminds me so much of Robert that it hurts and heals me at the same time. Together, they've been my strength. Our home in Charlotte was our heart. Robert and I bought that house when the kids were little. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a creaky porch, and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. But to me, it was perfect. After Robert died, I held on to it like a lifeline. Every photo, every dent in the wall, every scratch on the door had a story behind it. I would sit on the porch in the evenings, listening to the sound of crickets, remembering how Robert used to hum old country songs beside me. Life wasn't easy, but it was steady. My days were simple. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and video called Evelyn to talk about her students. Sometimes Jackson stopped by late at night after his shifts, dropping off groceries or just wanting to chat. We were close, the kind of family that didn't have much, but had enough love to keep everything together. I thought the worst pain of my life had already passed. Losing my husband had taught me what loneliness really felt like. I believed there was nothing left in this world that could break me again. But grief has a strange way of teaching you. It softens your heart just enough for life to hurt you again when you least expect it. It started subtly, a whisper of unease that I ignored. A few papers I couldn't understand, a phone call I thought was a mistake. I had no idea then that the safety I built brick by brick was about to crumble. I had no idea that the house Robert left me in love would soon turn into the stage for the cruelest betrayal of my life. For now, though, back then, I was just Marjorie, a widow who worked too much, loved too deeply, and believed that the world couldn't take anything else from her. I was wrong. Life had a quiet rhythm in those days. My mornings started before sunrise. I'd pack my lunch, fill a thermos with coffee, and drive to whichever patient needed me first. I've always loved the stillness of early morning in Charlotte. The streets half empty, the sky slowly turning pink over the rooftops. It reminded me that even after everything, life kept moving. When I'd return home in the evenings, I'd unlock the same front door Robert built with his hands. I'd light a small lamp near his photograph, whisper a quiet prayer, and sit down for dinner, usually something simple like soup or leftover pasta. On weekends, my children would visit. Evelyn brought homemade cookies. Jackson brought noise and laughter. We'd eat, joke, and talk about their plans. There were times I'd watch them and think, maybe I did something right after all. That house wasn't big, but it carried decades of warmth. Every inch of it told a story. The porch railing still had the marks from when Jackson tried to paint it blue. The kitchen counter had a chip from when Evelyn dropped her first baking dish. The hallway was filled with pictures of birthdays, graduations, and quiet Sunday mornings. Sometimes I'd sit on the living room couch with a cup of tea and let the memories wash over me. There were lonely nights, yes. Nights when I missed Robert so much that breathing hurt. But there was also comfort. My home was my refuge. The world outside could be harsh, but within those walls, I felt safe. I think that's why I didn't notice the small cracks forming. Not in the house, but in the life around it. When the first strange letter came, I assumed it was a mailing error. When someone called asking for Robert's signature, I laughed sadly and hung up. I never imagined those were signs. Tiny red flags waving, warning me that something terrible was quietly unfolding. People like me, we trust too easily. We believe that kindness comes naturally to others. That was my mistake. I thought my life had already endured its share of heartbreak. But destiny, it seems, wasn't done testing me. In those peaceful days, when the scent of baked bread filled my kitchen and my children's laughter echoed down the hall, I didn't know that my peace was temporary. The world I cherished was already shifting beneath my feet. And soon, it would collapse without mercy. It began one ordinary afternoon. I was folding laundry, humming to myself, when I noticed another envelope addressed to someone I didn't know. This time, the name wasn't a mistake. It was familiar. It was David Price. David had been one of Robert's old acquaintances. They grew up together, went to high school in the same small town before life sent them in different directions. David had attended Robert's funeral years ago, offered his condolences, and then disappeared. I hadn't seen or heard from him in over 10 years, so when his name appeared in my mail, I felt a strange unease crawl up my spine. A week later, he called. His voice was warm, friendly even. "Marjorie," he said, "it's been too long." I was in town and thought of stopping by. Just to say hello, I hesitated but agreed. It felt rude not to. After all, he had known my husband. When he came over, he looked older but polished. He brought flowers, sat on my couch, and asked questions about my health, my job, my kids. For a while it felt harmless, like a kind gesture from the past. Then the visits became frequent. He'd show up with groceries, offer to fix things around the house, bring small gifts, just because. Evelyn didn't like it. She said, "Mom, it's strange. Why is he always here?" But I told her, he's just being helpful. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I just wanted someone to talk to who remembered Robert. Looking back now, I see how calculated it all was. The timing, the politeness, the ease with which he entered my life again. He didn't force his way in. He drifted in like smoke under a door, slowly and quietly until the room was filled. There were papers he asked me to sign. Maintenance authorizations, he said. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband's old friend. He even mentioned Robert's name like he missed him too. But those papers weren't about fixing pipes or fences. They were steps in something far darker. That was the beginning of my undoing. The day it all came crashing down was a Wednesday. I came home late from work, tired and hungry, expecting the quiet comfort of my house. Instead, I saw a moving truck parked in the driveway. 2 strangers were carrying boxes inside. My first thought was confusion. Maybe they had the wrong address. But when I stepped closer, I froze. There he was, David, standing in the doorway, smiling like it was his house. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. He adjusted his tie and said calmly, "You should have received the notice. It's official now. This property isn't yours anymore." I blinked, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about?" "This is my home. My husband." He cut me off. "Legally, it's mine now. Everything was transferred. Check your mail if you don't believe me." The world blurred. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. My knees went weak. The walls that once felt like love now felt like strangers watching me break. I stumbled to the porch, staring at the truck, at the boxes that carried pieces of my life, my furniture, my memories. They were moving in as if I'd never existed. I went to the kitchen, grabbed Robert's framed photo, and held it close. Tears blurred my vision. I whispered, "You promised this house would always be mine. But promises can't fight greed." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car outside my own home until the sky turned grey. Every light in the house flickered, shadows of strangers dancing where my family once lived. That was the night I learned what betrayal truly feels like. It's not loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of your own heartbeat trying to convince you that you'll survive. The days after that were a blur. I moved into the small guest room at the back of the house because I didn't know where else to go. I told myself it was temporary, that this would all be a misunderstanding. But every day, the reality grew heavier. I'd wake up to voices in the kitchen, laughter that wasn't mine. I'd hear the sound of clinking glasses, footsteps on my stairs, doors opening and closing that used to belong to my family. I became invisible inside my own home. Evelyn came one afternoon and found me sitting outside on the porch steps. She looked at me, tears already in her eyes. "Mum, you can't live like this," she said. "He's taking everything." I forced a smile. "It's fine, sweetheart. I'll figure it out." But she shook her head. "You've already lost enough. You don't have to lose yourself too." Her words hit harder than I expected. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the walls that no longer felt like mine. I thought about Robert, about all the nights I stayed strong for everyone else. Maybe it was time to be strong for myself. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror and said aloud, "No one takes away my peace." My hands still trembled, but my voice didn't. Something inside me changed that day. Not anger, not revenge, but resolve. I was done being erased. That moment was the quiet beginning of everything that came next. David stood there in the middle of the living room, wearing the same confident smirk that used to charm everyone at church gatherings. But this time, that smile looked colder, sharper, like he had just won something he didn't deserve. He held out a folded paper and said calmly, "It's legal now, Marjorie. The house belongs to me." My world stopped moving. The sound of movers dragging furniture, boxes scraping the floor, and laughter from strangers filled the air like knives. I stared at the paper in his hand, the one that apparently decided my entire life in a single signature. My husband's photograph hung on the wall behind him, smiling. A cruel reminder of the promises we once made. My voice trembled as I whispered, "This was our home, David. Our memories live here." He shrugged. "You should have thought about that before letting things fall apart." That one sentence burned through me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to stop them from taking what was left of my peace. But instead, I stood there frozen, tears slipping silently down my face. Evelyn called that evening, and when she heard my voice shaking, she said, "Mom, what happened?" I couldn't answer. All I said was, "They moved in." That night, I sat in my car parked across the street, staring at my own house, lights shining through the windows like someone else's life playing in front of me. The next few days passed like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. David and his new wife made themselves at home, repainting the walls, rearranging the furniture, and throwing out things that held decades of my life. I watched from the side window as movers tossed away the old armchair where my husband used to sit every evening. Every thud of something hitting the trash bin felt like another piece of my heart breaking. I had nowhere to go, and the irony was painful. I was a nurse who healed others, but I couldn't heal myself. I stayed in a small guest room that used to be the storage space, while strangers laughed in my kitchen and drank wine from my glasses. David's wife, a younger woman with polished nails and a voice that cut through silence, once looked at me and said, "You should really find a new place soon." "It's awkward having you here that night," I cried quietly under a thin blanket, holding my husband's old sweater close. Jackson called the next morning. "Mom, don't let them do this. We'll fight." But I was tired of fighting, tired of losing, tired of being invisible in my own home. "No, son," I said softly. Some wars aren't meant to be fought. Some are meant to be walked away from days turned into weeks, and I began to feel like a ghost wandering inside my old life. I would wake up early to avoid seeing them and spend the evenings walking the quiet streets just to escape the noise of my own pain. Every night, I'd stand in the hallway, staring at the wedding photo still hanging on the wall, the only thing they hadn't touched. I could hear their laughter from the living room, the sound of wine glasses clinking, and the television playing loudly. Once, I walked past them, and David said mockingly, "You really should learn to move on, Marjorie." I didn't reply, but in my heart, something changed that night. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was the beginning of letting go. Evelyn visited that weekend. When she saw the state of the house, her eyes welled up. "Mum," she whispered, "you can't live like this. This isn't you." I looked around the room, saw the boxes, the strangers, and my husband's fading memory and said, "I know." Evelyn squeezed my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt strength returning. Quiet, invisible, but real. That night was long and sleepless. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, and thought about everything I had lost. Not just the house, but the peace that once filled it. My husband used to say, "Marjorie, a house is just wood and bricks. It's the heart inside it that matters." I had forgotten those words. Around midnight, I went to the closet, pulled out a small box of old letters, and read one he had written to me before he died. "If you ever feel lost, remember, love is not tied to walls. It lives in you." I cried for hours, not from pain, but from realization. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind, and I knew what I had to do. At dawn, I packed my few belongings, the photo, the letters, and his sweater, and placed the house key on the table. When David saw me walking out, he smirked and said, "Running away?" I looked him straight in the eye and replied, "No, David. I'm finally leaving." That moment didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom I hadn't known in years. The next morning, I went straight to the bank. My hands trembled as I signed the forms to cash out my pension. Every pen stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of my strength. The bank teller asked softly, "Are you sure about this, Mum?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Yes," I said. "For the first time, I'm sure." I took the money, called a realtor, and put the house on sale. Within a week, everything was finalized. The look on David's face when he realized the house was sold was something I'll never forget. Shock, disbelief, and panic. He shouted, "You can't do this." I replied calmly, "Actually, I can." It was still in my name until yesterday. By the end of the week, they were gone, and for the first time in a long while, so was the pain. I moved into a small apartment with a tiny garden, where Evelyn helped me hang new curtains. As sunlight filled the room, I felt peace. My home was no longer stolen. It was reborn. And so was I. A week later, I walked through the empty halls of my old house one last time. The rooms echoed with memories, my children's laughter, the smell of Sunday breakfasts, the soft hum of my husband's old radio. Everything was gone now. The furniture, the curtains, even the warmth had disappeared. But strangely, I didn't feel pain. I felt calm. When I stepped outside, a light breeze brushed against my face as if whispering, "You did it." I got into my car, parked across the street for the last time, and watched the moving trucks carry away what used to be mine. David stood on the porch, his face pale, shouting into his phone. His new wife slammed the door behind her, her voice filled with anger. The house they thought would be their new beginning was now just another closed chapter. As I drove away, I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. Steady, strong, and free. For years, those same hands had built, cleaned, and comforted others. Now, For the first time, they were steering me toward peace. I whispered softly to myself, "Goodbye, old life. Thank you for teaching me everything, even through pain." Within a few days, I found a small apartment at the edge of town. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a tiny balcony that overlooked a patch of wildflowers. But when I first stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: safety. The walls were bare, the floor creaked, but it was mine. I placed my husband's photo on the mantel, hung a simple curtain, and brewed coffee in my new kitchen. It smelled like hope. Evelyn came by with groceries and helped me unpack boxes. "It's small," she said, smiling, "but it feels warm." Jackson joined us later with a few plants, insisting, "You need something green in here, Mum." We laughed, a sound that hadn't echoed in my home for months. That night, I sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. I didn't feel rich or powerful, but I felt content. The silence around me wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. My phone buzzed with a message from David. "You'll regret this, Marjorie." I stared at the screen, smiled faintly, and deleted it. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to reply. Some battles are won in silence. Weeks turned into months, and my new life began to take shape. I started working extra shifts at the care center and slowly filled my apartment with little things that made me happy: a thrifted lamp, a second-hand rug, and a bookshelf filled with novels I'd always wanted to read. My patients noticed the change in me. One of them, an elderly woman, once said, "You smile differently now, dear, like someone who's not pretending anymore." Her words stayed with me. Every morning before work, I'd water the plants Jackson had given me. They'd grown taller, greener, just like me. Evelyn often visited on weekends, bringing pastries and stories from her office. We'd sit together and laugh over things that once felt too painful to remember. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. One Sunday afternoon, I passed by my old street out of curiosity. The house looked abandoned, windows dusty, grass overgrown. It felt poetic, almost like karma. For a moment, I stood there in silence and said under my breath, "You took everything, David, but you couldn't take my peace." Then I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than ever. Months later, I received a letter in the mail, a legal notice addressed to me. David wanted to meet, claiming he needed to settle things. I hesitated at first, but agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, where the sound of spoons clinking against cups filled the air. He looked older, thinner, and tired. "I just wanted to see the house again," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel right that you sold it." I looked at him for a long moment and finally replied, "You already destroyed it when you destroyed us, David." His eyes shifted away, unable to meet mine. For years, I'd dreamed of this moment, of finally telling him how deeply he'd hurt me. But now that it had come, I didn't feel anger. I felt closure. "I hope you find peace," I said softly, gathering my purse, "because I already have." As I walked out of the cafe, sunlight poured through the glass windows and fell on my face. That warmth, gentle and forgiving, felt like a final blessing. I didn't look back. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need release. A year later, my life looked completely different. My apartment walls were covered in family photos, and every corner held something I loved. Evelyn got married to a kind man. Jackson bought his first house, and I finally learned how to dance again. In my kitchen, barefoot, with the radio playing softly. Sometimes I think about the past, but only to remind myself of how far I've come. I learned that strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. People can take your money, your home, even your trust, but they can't take your peace unless you hand it over. I still visit my husband's grave every Sunday and tell him, "I did it. I finally found peace, just like you said I would. Standing there, I always feel his presence in the breeze, in the sunlight, in my heart. Moral: never let anyone define your worth. Sometimes losing everything is how you finally find yourself. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these real stories alive for others who need hope.